This is the urgent crash course in anti-Zionism we all need now, and we're going to move quickly, so keep up. Maybe you've noticed a debate happening, from your social media feeds to fancy event panels at Jewish institutions, about what anti-Zionism is. Many sources, especially the older ones, are still zeroing in on what the correct definition of Zionism is, or making the case about how anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, while the actual danger is already miles ahead of those conversations. So let's start with the part people need to understand first. Anti-Zionism is not opposition to Zionism. There's not even a hyphen in the word anti-Zionism, just like anti-Semitism is not about opposition to Semitism or Semites, because anti-Zionism is totally 100% not about opposition to Zionism. It doesn't even matter what you believe Zionism is. Jews returning to their ancestral homeland, a 19th century political movement from Theodor Herzl, or something else entirely. For our purposes, those definitions are complete red herrings and dead ends. Anti-Zionism is not a political position about the state of Israel. Anti-Zionism is the most modern form of Jew hatred. Full stop. Jew hatred has shed its previous skin, anti-Semitism, and emerged under a new name, anti-Zionism. Anti-Semitism didn't debate Semitism. It invented a grotesque caricature, controlling the media, the banks, on and on. You know the drill. In order to demonize Jews. Anti-Zionism does the same exact thing. It constructs a fictional Zionist, colonizing, apartheid running, genocide committing, in order to demonize Jews. Are the dots starting to connect in your head yet? Anti-Zionism is its own ideology, its own worldview, its own hate movement. And it runs on three core libels: obsessive accusations that require no evidence and that people repeat as if they are self-evident truths. The colonizer libel, the apartheid libel, and the genocide libel. These three libels work together to create the impression that a Jewish majority state, what anti-Zionists call an ethno-state, is inherently evil and oppressive before you even get to any facts. Here's how each one works. The colonizer libel claims Jews do not come from Israel, that Jews are a foreign European race with no indigeneity or belonging. This erases 3,000 years of Jewish history in one sentence. The apartheid libel claims that Jews are inherently racist, that Jewish identity itself is supremacist because Jews believe they're chosen. This one comes straight out of medieval anti-Judaic theology, dressed up in activist language. And the genocide libel, the most malicious one of all, is used specifically to invert the Holocaust, to recast Jews as Nazis, flatten Jewish suffering, and frame Jewish self-defense as mass murder. These three libels work as a closed system, with one flowing directly into the next. If Jews are colonizers, then they must run apartheid. And if they run apartheid, they must be committing genocide. A neat little moral equation, held together entirely by lies. Once the libels harden, everything else flows from them. The harassment, the stalking, the purges, the violence, and the justification for why Jews allegedly deserve it. That is the foundation. That is what anti-Zionism actually is. Not a policy disagreement, not a philosophical counterpoint, not activism, not a debate, not an argument about borders, not a critique about policies, nothing but a hate movement built to demonize Jews using the social justice ideas for what today's world views as the epitome of all evil. And once people believe that premise, everything else flows from it. They don't need arguments. They don't need proof. They simply repeat the accusations until the accusations feel true. From there, anti-Zionism begins to behave a lot like a stalker. It fixates on Jews. It projects fantasies onto Jews. It monitors Jews constantly and dictates what Jews are allowed to believe or say. It assigns collective guilt based solely on Jewish identity. And it marks all Jews, not just Israelis, as legitimate targets. Literally. This is why anti-Zionism purges Jews from universities, student groups, activist spaces, arts spaces, and whole professional fields. It bans Jews who identify with Israel. It pressures Jews to disavow themselves in order to participate. It creates tests that only Jews are expected to pass. And this is why anti-Zionism produces violence, real physical violence against Jews living in the diaspora, outside of Israel, in New York, London, Paris, Amsterdam, Sydney, LA, Miami, synagogues vandalized, Jewish businesses attacked, Molotov cocktails thrown at Jewish institutions, Jews beaten on the street, Jews followed home, Jews shot, Jews harassed in schools and workplaces, not because of Israeli government policy, not because of what's happening over there, but because anti-Zionism constructs the category Zionist as a stand-in for Jew we can go after. That's the part people need to understand up front. Anti-Zionism doesn't target Israel. It targets Jews everywhere, including Jews who have never set foot in Israel. And just a quick FYI, anti-Zionism was literally pioneered by the Soviet Union. Gen Z, the Soviet Union was what came after Russia and before, well, Russia again. But after watching this video, you can ask ChatGPT about it. From scratch, the Soviets framed Israel as a racist colonial conspiracy. And the real world effect of that propaganda was that anti-Zionism became the pretext to purge hundreds of thousands of Jews, Russian Jews, from public life, academia, government, and eventually the country itself. Most of them live in Israel now. Now, a brief aside, because it matters. Anti-Zionism doesn't help Palestinians. It exploits Palestinian suffering, encourages extremism, silences Palestinian moderates, prolongs conflict, and creates incentives for the worst actors to dominate. It cannot survive without Palestinian suffering. But again, that's just context. This video is speaking primarily to Jews, allies, and the silent majority of potential allies. So we'll stay focused on the part that concerns us directly. Now, let's zoom out for the bigger picture that sits behind all of this. Jew hatred mutates. It always has. For centuries, it was anti-Judaism, religious demonization in Christian Europe that cast Jews as Christ killers and devils. Then it mutated into anti-Semitism, racial ideology in the 19th and 20th centuries that cast Jews as racial pollutants, infiltrators, and biological threats. This was the Hitler kind. And now it has mutated again into anti-Zionism, a secular, progressive-sounding, post-colonial vocabulary that recasts Jews as super white colonizers, racial oppressors, and genociders. Same hatred, new costume. It's not anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It's more accurately, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are each the dominant form of Jew hatred in their times and societies. And this is where many Jewish organizations are falling behind. They're still teaching anti-Semitism workshops built around tropes from the 1930s. Money, media, dual loyalty, while the hatred in front of us is using an entirely different lexicon. They're still trying to translate anti-Zionism into anti-Semitism, instead of recognizing that anti-Zionism is a distinct, modern form of Jew hatred that needs to be named directly. We're not living in the anti-Judaism era. We're not living in the anti-Semitism era either. We are living in the anti-Zionist era. And that means Jews need to stop soft-pedaling the diagnosis. Stop trying to win impossible debates with people who don't care about evidence. Stop tiptoeing around the word anti-Zionism as if it needs permission or qualification to be taken seriously. Don't rely on older language about anti-Semitism and defining anti-Zionism in terms of it. Name anti-Zionism directly as the hate movement it is. Turn your gaze on the racists targeting Jews instead. Anti-Zionism wants Jews trapped in explanations and rebuttals because a Jew defending himself has already conceded the premise. Once you're playing defense, you've already lost. The power comes from calling out the bigotry, not performing innocence for bigots. Anti-Zionism is bad. Anti-Zionism is dangerous. Anti-Zionism is Jew hatred, the modern form. And here's the part that matters most. Jews don't need allies to be Zionists. We don't need anyone to sign an ideological loyalty oath. We don't need everyone to agree with us politically. In fact, anti-Zionism comes in both left-wing and right-wing varieties, because of course it does. On the left, it's the post-colonial language we've already mentioned, casting Jews as white settlers, racial oppressors, and genociders, and calling for the destruction of Israel as a supposed act of liberation. On the right, it's less about post-colonial guilt and more about isolationism, America first, and no special relationship. It wants to expel Zionism from right-wing institutions, casting it as a threat to nationalism, market liberalism, and Christianity. The vocabulary is different, but the goal is the same: to mark Jews as a hostile presence that must be pushed out of public life. What we need urgently is for decent people to reject the anti-Zionist hate movement. Reject the libels. Reject the pseudo-logic. Reject the stalking and the purges. Reject the pressure campaigns. Reject the violence. Reject the lies that enable the violence. Because until that happens, there is no safety for Jews in the West and no path for peace in the Middle East. That's the crash course. That's where things actually stand. And now you know. This has been a PSA.